Today's lecture is supported by the Hellenic Foundation Chicago, so we would like to thank them for their generous support, not only today, but throughout the years. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our speaker today. George Anagnostou is the Michalis Marinakis Professor of Modern Greek Language and Culture at Ohio State University. His interests include diaspora and American ethnic studies with a focus on Greek America. His published research covers a broad range of subjects, including film, documentary, ethnography, folklore, literature, history, sociology, and public humanities. He is the author of Contours of White Ethnicity, Popular Ethnography and the Making of Usable Pasts in Greek America. He is a co-editor of Redirecting Ethnic Singularity, Italian Americans and Greek Americans in Conversation, which was awarded the Modern Greek Studies Association Vasiliki Karayanaki Best Edited Book Prize in 2022. Since 2017, he is the editor of the online journal Ergon, Greek American and Diaspora Arts and Letters. Welcome, Mr. Anagnostou, Professor Anagnostou. Let's give a nice hand, please. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for coming. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I spoke to the group about 3 years ago under different circumstances, under COVID. It was online, and it was wonderful. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to meet you in person. This is very important for me, these kinds of venues, because I think we need to be creating conversation and bridges between the university and the communities. Thank you also for choosing this topic, that is the coal miners, which is a topic that we don't often speak about. The timing is extremely appropriate. Yesterday, on April 20th, we were commemorating the Ludlow massacre. It took place in a small town called Ludlow near Trinidad in southern Colorado. It involved a clash between the strikers who were living now in tents for over 9 months, and the clash was between the strikers, their families, and state militia and mine guards. It ended with 25 people dead, including 2 women and 11 children. We will have an opportunity to dig into this topic in more detail. This year, on March 8th, we also commemorated the centenary, 100 years from the Castle Gate mine disaster in Utah, eastern Utah. The disaster killed 171 miners and 1 rescue worker. A high proportion of the miners were married, 114 in total. 50 of the victims were Greeks, the majority Cretan. The talk honors Helen Papanikolas, a historian who was born in 1917 in Utah, and she eyewitnessed almost a century of Greek American life in Utah. And she was a pioneer as early as the 1950s. She started documenting the stories of the immigrants. And that was before immigration story became more popular in the American Academy around the 1970s. So she was a pioneer. She wrote many books, including the biography of her parents. And also she was very instrumental in changing how Utahns thought of their states. In many ways, she invested in documenting the diversity of Utah, and she really placed Greek American research within major Utah institutions such as the Utah Historical Quarterly, Obviously, I borrow my title from a title she gave to a special issue published in the 1970 about the Greek immigrants in Utah, Toil and Rage in a New Land. The words are extremely appropriate to describe a particular structure of feeling, a set of emotions that really permeated coal miners in the early 20th century. The violent loss of life in the massacre, in the 1914 Ludlow massacre, and the 1924 disaster are not a historical exception in the United States. They underline a broad pattern of gruesome realities in workplaces connected with early industrialization in the 20th century. One cause of violent death was industrial accidents in the coal mining, railroad, lumber, and the textile industries. To focus on coal mining, between 1900 and 1946, within the span of 46 years, 46,000 miners were killed while working underground, 1,000 coal miners per year. Another cause was killing in clashes between strikers, mine guards, and militia. Hundreds were killed in this manner. We cannot possibly understand the coal miners' experiences at the time without acknowledging these grave and gruesome facts and their implications. It was a violent era in any way one sees it. It was in the Masonic Cemetery in Trinidad, Colorado in 2022 that I first encountered the presence of large-scale loss of migrant life. We were visiting with a colleague to pay respects to the grave of Louis Tikas. I will be speaking about Louis Tikas in great detail. A labor organizer from Crete who was beaten and shot on the back during the Ludlow massacre I mentioned earlier. Once we identified Tikas's grave, it is a restored grave. We were stunned to face rows of graves, humble in comparison, of buried immigrant bodies whose tombstones revealed untimely deaths. I had read Zisi Papanikola's book about Tikas prior to the visit, which I felt it as a pilgrimage. But who were the other individuals buried near him? What was their experience like? And you see here that some were in the early 20s, some were in the mid 30s. So here again, we speak about a large scale of untimely loss of life. So who were these people? What was their experience like? And I was haunted by this experience. I have to say now, these places are extremely close to my heart and in many ways force me in some way to keep learning and writing about it. So what I would like to do today, I would like to try to evoke an experience that we don't often speak about. And also I would like to ask the question, why does it matter for us to know this distant and violent past? Εφωνεύθη, he was killed. Yorgos Anagnostou. It was the supreme economic importance of coal that brought Greek immigrants to the coal fields of New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and beyond, including Virginia and Alaska. We don't know much about the Eastern United States mining experience for the Greeks. Coal was a king, the engine for development at the time. It fueled the vast and expanding network of rail transportation. It heated homes, businesses, and offices. It was utilized in the production of the steel needed for construction. The icons of American modernity, the skyscraper, the mighty navy, the railroad, household amenities depended on coal. Coal fueled, literally and metaphorically, the project of America becoming a global industrial superpower. Immigrants were an integral component of this project. They provided the needed labor to extract vast deposits of minerals, coal, and natural resources, which then were processed in smelters and factories. Late in the 19th century, the majority of the laboring force consisted by immigrants from Wales, Scotland, England, Belgium, countries with long mining traditions. But once this demographic resorted to striking as the means of improving their working conditions, coal operators turned to Southeastern Europe. The immigrants were recruited aggressively from rural Greece, Italy, Bulgaria, Poland. They were unskilled, but were essential to break the strikes. They were willing to work for lesser wages than American workers, which infuriated the latter. The fact that they were a multi-ethnic labor force, speaking different languages, minimized the possibility of their collective mobilization. But they too eventually, as we will see, resorted to unionism once they experienced the deplorable working conditions. During the 1913-1914 strike in Colorado, the 1,300 strikers in the tent colony that we saw represented 22 nationalities. Some nationalities were former enemies. Only a year earlier, the Greeks and the Bulgarians were fighting each other in the Balkan Wars. Now they were striking together for their own interests. High demand for labor and relatively high wages pulled immigrants towards coal towns and camps, the attraction offsetting the extreme potential danger. Coal mining, I quote, remained the most dangerous job in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But the price was high death toll, as I mentioned. The immigrants kept coming in the thousands, providing a surplus labor force vulnerable to exploitation. So the more laborers you have at your disposal as a supply, the more you can be emboldened if you were a coal miner operator to say, okay, if you don't like it, just go, because there was always the next person to be hired. This is what I mean by surplus labor. For the Greeks, entering the coal fields involved chain migration. Cretans and Roumeliots sending letters about the abundance of work, inviting relatives and co-villagers. Remittances sent home provided ample proof of the stories about the United States as an El Dorado, where the streets were paved with gold. I called Helen Papanikolas. The young at the turn of the century sat in village squares and in coffee houses, listening to priests reading letters from Americi and gazing at photographs of former villagers dressed in American finery. Work was everywhere, the letter said, especially on the Siderogrames, the railroad. Miners were photographed on their Sunday best to convey a sense of newfound success to family and co-villagers. And here, the Cretans, these are Cretan coal miners who display guns and alcoholic spirits, the signs of traditional Cretan masculinity, and also the newfound wealth in the United States. As an aside, a footnote that was very important information, this photograph is displayed at the Ellis Island Museum in New York City, or it's in New Jersey, right? I think it's under the jurisdiction of New Jersey now. And there was a group that, and it was Helen Papanikola's, her initiative to really display this photograph. And a group of Greek Americans was very upset for this photograph because somehow they were fearing that it represents Greeks as a warlike, and the visitors might get the wrong impression of who the Greeks are all about. But behind this veneer of wealth and well-being, the realities were different and darker, literally and metaphorically. Underground coal mining meant not only heavy labor and danger, but also bodies engulfed in dampness and darkness. An investigative reporter by a rare outside visitor, an Athenian female journalist, Maria Sarantopoulou Economidou, who was permitted to enter the Clear Creek mine in Utah in the early 1910s, has provided an eyewitness account of the conditions of the coal miners. For the early 1910s, a woman alone visited all 54 states, all 54 states in the United States, and she wrote the book «Οι Έλληνες της Αμερικής όπως τους είδα», The Greeks in the US as I saw them. She was the wife of a Greek publisher. He was running a newspaper. And in many ways, she wanted to raise awareness in Greek society, and particularly to the Greek government, that these people are treated inhumanely, and the government must do something somehow to protect their basic labor rights. The book is in Greek, as you can imagine, but a chapter has been translated in English. It is available online for free open access in the Journal of the Hellenic Diaspora. Thanks to Zisi Papanikolaou and another Greek American historian, Dan Georgiakos, whom we lost recently. So Maria Sarantopoulou Economidou writes, "Thick darkness encircled us, and the water froze my feet. Something was in the underground dampness and cold I have never experienced, something akin to death." Darkness came in various shades in the lives of miners. Laborers exiting the mine, exhausted at the end of the shift in the evening, encountered a darkness different than the all-consuming one they left behind. An underground mine is also the domain of the dark, Craig Johnson wrote. Dark underground is not the same as dark above ground. Underground, the dark is tangible. It is something that the mind feels and breathes. Above ground, even on the darkest of night, there is some light and a feeling of space. Even going to the deepest part of your basement, wrapping yourself in a blanket at night with all lights turned off, the darkness is like day compared to the darkness in mine. So in many ways then, miners would spend a day being engulfed in darkness, the darkness of underground and the darkness of night. Speaking about a structure of feeling in the coal mining communities, the specter of death was everywhere because the miners knew of the frequency of disasters happening very frequently. Only 1 year before the Castle Gate disaster, there was a disaster in 1923 in Dawson, Mexico, about 50 miles south of Ludlow, where about 300 people died, many of them Greek. This is a very new book by journalist Nick Pappas. He writes about the two disasters in Dawson, 1913 and 1923. And here we have again the feeling that death can strike any time. This is the reality that defined in many ways the daily life of the miners. Speaking about the culture of coal miners, because of the proximity, the possibility of death, coal miners were constantly speaking about a good death. And here I have a quote from immigrants from Finland. And for them, again, a good death meant not dying young, limited pain and suffering, a chance to be mourned and commemorated by family and community, an officiated burial in marked and preserved space, ensuring that family in Finland was informed of the death, and if possible, not leaving a bereaved spouse and children in a dire financial position. This was also the beliefs of the Greek miners, and for them, devout Greek Orthodox, having to them administered the Greek Orthodox funerary rites were extremely important, but also was extremely important that their families back at home, they would know that he experienced a good death. And here we have a photograph from what appears to be a coal camp. You see the majority are men, we have several women, some children, and again, open casket photographs for the purpose of sending the photograph to relatives in Greece. The documentary Tears and Pain of the Cretans in Xenitia is available online. If you are interested, I will be more than happy to share the link with you. Also, there is another documentary if you're interested, and this was produced in the island of Carpathos. It is in Greek, and it's about the mine disasters in Dawson, Mexico. And here we have an interesting account by Nick Papas, who speaks about Vasilis Makris. Vasilius Makris was a toddler when the disaster took place. He lost his father. These orphans, as we see, were totally traumatized. And he retrieved into silence. He will not speak about his feelings to his son, George Makris, right? So here then we have a kind of what some humanities people call post-memory. So in many ways, there's a discontinuity of memory because of the trauma of those who experienced events, and somehow they feel that they cannot speak about them, often because they cannot grasp the enormity of the suffering, or sometimes perhaps to protect their children. That was the case for many early Greek immigrants, particularly when they were persecuted by the Ku Klux Klan. The mothers, they will try not to speak to their children about these issues so that they will avoid traumatizing them. So let us move then to the Castlegate town. And a question that we may want to ask is, it is not only the coal miners involved in this story, it is also their wives, their children, and their sweethearts. So how did the wives then feel? And how girlfriends felt when boyfriends and husbands set out to enter the dark worlds? The specter of death or potential injury was ever present. A testimony of the adult daughter of a Greek miner in Utah conveys the pervasive fear blanketing the everydayness of her mother. The sound of the miner rescue whistle, often waking them before dawn, was a terrifying reminder of the nearness of death. She recalls her mother living in a never-ending stress. And this is from a documentary on the Greeks in Utah, where we will see in Utah there is still regional memory among the descendants of the coal miners, now third and fourth generation. There is still a strong regional memory through the families about the traumatic events of their past. I quote, "I remember my father leaving for work in the morning, and we would not see him until late in the night. And I remember my mother sending us near the tracks where they knew they would be coming home and would be dark, and she wanted us to go up there and see if we could see the lights of lamps of men coming out of work, because they always feared that it may something have happened in the mines. So it was frightening and very, very scary. And my mother lived in constant fear always." Specter of death, the everyday fear of losing a beloved one, were everyday realities. It is Helen Papanikolaou, once again, who conveys the Castle Gate mourning in connection to the Greek population in the region. As I mentioned, 171 coal miners died, among them 49, or in some accounts 50 Greeks. The majority Cretans, 99%, died, leaving behind 19 widows and 41 orphans. She writes, "The Greek church in Price was not large enough to hold services for the men, and a public hall was used." Price was the capital of the county, about 20 miles south of Castlegate. So the church was not large enough to hold services for the men, and a public hall was used. The widow's keening of the Myrologia, the Lamentations, the eerie high-pitched dirges recounting extemporaneously the life and hopes of the dead, echoed through Greek towns. Black-dressed widows, children, and friends followed the casket to the graveyards. They were not alone in their grief. A piece in the Albuquerque Morning Journal captures women's rituals mourning surrounding another disaster, the 1913 Dawson mine disaster, a code. All through the services, which were mercifully brief, could be heard the chant of the Austrian widows, the hysterical cry of Mexican women, the moans of Greek bereaved ones, and the sorrowful sobbing of the little group of American women who so sadly had been bereft of their loved ones. For women, the question, what's next, must have haunted the wives of the dead early on amidst the shocking devastation. For some, the strain was compounded by the additional loss of a brother or other relatives. Chain migration, family and regional, resulted to the dense presence of related individuals in a coal mining town. At Castlegate, several women lost husbands, brothers, and male kin at once in a single explosion. We're talking about family devastation. In turn, the remaining available kin networks served as havens for support, as we will see, and solace in the aftermath. Again, I'm just realizing, and I was very conscious when I was drafting the presentation, we cannot avoid the violence and the loss and the grief. I try to be very selective in the photographs that I would share with you. I purposefully did not include some very hard to see photographs so that death will not become a spectacle. But somehow, when we speak about this era in connection to this occupation, we cannot avoid this reality. So it is my duty and obligation to convey to you. A dramatic photograph captures the funeral service at the Castle Gate. A community in grief, the bodies of the living circling densely around the dead bodies of the miners in series of sealed coffins lined closely next to each other, a wreath on top of each. The faces of the participants, mostly male, appear stunned. The majority turns to look at the camera, responding to a photographer's presence. A collective experience, a particular historical moment, is caught visually in its immediacy for us to reflect about the scale of loss and suffering among these communities. Two children at the right front, as we face the image and a woman behind them, catch my attention. Looking closely now, you can see them in the enlarged focus. It is two children hugging each other that I could not see. I thought they were just two children with their heads downcast, but they were not. They were, as I would try to look closely, they were hugging each other. The children's closeness to a casket indicates they must have been two of the orphans in the disaster. The woman, most certainly their mother, her gaze downcast, absorbed in grief, is one of the few not facing the camera. We see one of the children eyeing the camera while embracing her sibling, of whose we see the back of her head. Is she a girl or a boy, perhaps? You can help me out, identify the gender. A family in distress, closing up together for the final farewell to a husband and a father. A brutal introduction to the precarious life of working class coal miners. In the collective lamenting, we hear echoes of working class eyewitnessing the violent end of lives consumed in labor for a living. We sense, at least to some degree, the scale of the ordeal. The women were lamenting their beloved, but they were also lamenting their grim prospects. Returning to Greece was an option that only few followed. Many saw that their children stood better chances in life here than in the village. Many feared that if they would return, they would be dependent on relatives and they would lose any sense of independence. The majority of the women, the widows, found shelter among relatives in the United States. Traditional expectations and poverty made the option of remarrying unlikely. And there is an article about these women that in many ways also identifies two of them, at least, who were able to overcome old world dictates that somehow widows should mourn forever, who moved to California. They found jobs, they remarried, and they started a new life. So there is this also element of women exhibiting agency and trying to find a new meaning in life. Let us shift our focus to labor relations, the experience of the miners in what was a whole industry involved in their transportation from rural Greece to coal mining places, and how these labor relations played out both in connection to what we call, as we will see, the Greek padrones, and also the coal mine operators at the time. I will be starting with a letter. I came across this letter at the Helen Papanikola's archive in Salt Lake City. In the spring of 1911, 50 Greek copper miners from Binyam Canyon, Utah, wrote an angry letter to the governor of Utah, William S. Spry, demanding his intervention against their padrone, Leonidas Skleris. we quote, "Do you think this is right for sclerists to sell livelihoods to the poor workman at extortion $20 and to thus suck the blood of the poor laborer? What are we, in the free country of America, or in a country dominated by a despotic form of government? Hoping you will liberate us from this padrone who is ravaging the blood of the poor laborer." So here then we have very strong language condemning the practices, and I will enumerate the practice of padrone. And we may want to also connect this sense of the immigrants being exploited by a person of authority. Padrones get tremendous power with the coal mine operators, but also they had experiences in Greece where people of authority will also try to exploit them. So here then, for them coming to America meant also they believe that they will be somehow moving away from structures of exploitation in their villages where the proukondas or the politician will be exploiting their labor. And now they came to the United States and they came across. That's all. Okay, it happens. Thank you. So let us reflect on this letter. And what we see in this letter, what we witness, is that the laborers resort to American authorities, in doing so by citing American ideals and laws to request justice in the workplace. They name the infamously exploitative labor agent, the Padrones Clearis, as the cause of their grievances. The letter helps us see the coal miners not as victims or passive immigrants, but as political agents exercising agency who seek change for something that they thought was abusing them. It is instructive to place this letter in the broader context of how the media represented Greek coal miners in the region. The letter, civil, addressing in a peaceful way and respectful way the miner, but nevertheless using a very strong wording, language, in many ways implicitly criticizing the United States that this is not coming true to its ideals. The letter implicitly answers frequent accusations in the media that the immigrants were undisciplined and primitive, the scum of Europe. The newspapers will write, a threat, and they were seen as a threat to American democracy. It's a huge chapter of early Greek immigrant history. To place this letter in context, we must also recognize the legal status of the immigrant laborers. A significant to a large number, we don't have specific data, were illegal. The Foreign Act passed in 1885, a quote, prohibited the importation and migration of foreigners and aliens under contract or agreement to perform labor in the United States, end of quote. For those immigrants who wanted to enter the country with employment contracts, and there were many, it was immigrant middlemen, the padrones, who were indispensable in finding jobs, instructing them how to evade questions in Ellis Island, and they will also then direct them to specific mines where jobs were waiting for them. And that was not a Greek-specific phenomenon. The Italians and the Mexicans were also involved. They were valued highly by the coal operators because on a moment's notice, the padrones could, on demand, could supply laborers to the coal miners, right? This is a seasonal work. Let's say for a project, they need 20 workers. Tomorrow, there will be phone calls in the coffee houses. Scleris had a network of agents, and they will be able to furnish at no cost to the coal operators these laborers. The Leonidas Clearis, I mentioned his name. He operated out of a Salt Lake City. He was renting a whole floor of a suite in Utah. He owned labor agencies in several major cities. He was dumped the Tsar of Greece. His underlings recruited in Greece as well as America. The job fees that the letter above mentioned range from $15 to $20 per laborer, something that was not reported to the coal operators. It was only the $1 subtracted from their monthly wages that was shown on record. The abuses were blatant. They are very carefully documented. Agents often bribed foremen to fire workers so that the padrones would be collecting the fees of the next applicant. Agents often took commissions on money sent home by their clients. All too often, the agents pocketed the entire sum, and it continues on and on and on. Early on, persuading illiterates to sign contracts in which they gave up their ownership of property, right? So this explains the rage. And this explains the strong language in the letter. They were fed up, the immigrants were fed up. And there were more, as we will see, there were even more abuses where they would not allow them to experience some kind of socioeconomic mobility. I strongly recommend this book if you're interested, by Gunther Peck, Reinventing Free Labor. Rage in the old world, in being subjected to insults in the old world, meant a call for vengeance, as we will see. So it was not rare for immigrants to really attack and even kill labor agents, which gave the Greeks the reputation, the poor reputation, that they were undisciplined, that they were bloodthirsty. Of course, the newspapers made all kinds of sensational highlights about this situation. So it is very interesting when the Cretans joined the 1911 strike in Binyan Canyon with the only purpose, for the union to include the demands that the operators will hire labor scleries, padrones scleries. All the union demands were rejected, but the Greek demand for getting rid of scleries took place. Scleries disappears from the historical record. A Cretan miner tried to kill him unsuccessfully. Rumors have it that he fled to Mexico, but we don't know anything about him. But other labor agents now continued the operation in a less exploitative way. Let us move to the situation in the coal mines. So the padrones were only one element of a larger problem, which was workplace exploitation. This is a fact recognized by Utah's official historiography, and I mention this and I emphasize this because this is not a union propaganda. When it comes to these instances, the labor and the coal operators had different perspectives, different interpretations, who are to blame for the disasters, etc. But these material that I will share with you now are part of the Utah curriculum, where young Utahs now are taught this kind of past. So I will be focusing on the married miners. They were residing in privately owned boarding houses, adding to the corporate profits because they had to pay rent. The single men, they could just launch in private boarding houses. So I quote from the Utah textbook: Companies provided the housing for their workers and then deducted rent from each paycheck. The cost of goods that a miner or his family bought at the company store was deducted directly from his paycheck. And that's one of the most important facts here. Some miners receive their pay as a store credit, known as scrip, instead of a paycheck. And that scrip was only usable in company stores. So they were forced to buy the supplies from company stores, and the prices, of course, were in many ways higher. So miners then often went into debt to their employers, which made it impossible for them to quit their jobs. There is, I will share with you the title for the documentary. This is a Greek-American lawyer in Utah who remembers of his grandfather, and he will speak about the situation as indentured slavery. In many ways, the workers get trapped into a cycle that they cannot get out of it, and they cannot leave all these towns. Some of them were fenced in order to avoid the union people entering, but also there were mine guards that will monitor the spatial mobility of the miners. These facts are also cited in oral accounts by the descendants of Greek miners. As I mentioned, there is strong regional memory in Utah. I strongly recommend this documentary, which speaks about the role of the Greeks in the 1913-1914 strike, which led to the Ludlow massacre. The descendants speak about a system of labor in which workers were under constant surveillance. If discovered buying merchandise outside the company store, they were fired, speaking about surveillance. In other accounts, they are seen as captives to a network of extortions set up by the padrones. Helen Papanikolaou wrote in 1966, I quote, "The laborers were told to trade at certain Greek businesses by the padrones, or they would lose their jobs. The owners of these meat, grocery, and clothing stores were all agents of Skleris." And this is important for us to make a mental note, because it will be useful for us when we reflect about this kind of situation. Now, from the perspective of the companies, this operation was their application of free market principles. Laborers were free to decide whether to join or not. The ideology of choice then was applied in relation to individuals who, of course, with very few options for survival. And also, it's also very interesting how the companies came up with a scheme where they will call the laborers contractors, independent contractors. In other words, they will not pay them hourly wages. So the laborers have to buy everything they needed: boots, clothes, dynamite, tools. They needed to buy them from the store on their own expenses, and they will be paid on the basis of the weight of coal that they will be producing per day. So the miners then were entering work being in debt because they had to buy all the necessary equipment and clothes. Let us turn to the eyewitness account by Maria Sarantopoulou Economidou. She said, one needs to know the Greeks and the emphasis they place on honor, timi, philotimo, in order to understand their rage and acts of revenge. The reputation of being militant had empirical basis. They were. Sometimes they killed foremen who systematically insulted or cheated them in acts of vengeance. They were not shy in shooting and killing strikebreakers. Many had experience in guerrilla fighting, the Cretans fighting the Ottomans, as late as 1895. There were also the Greeks fighting in the 1897 war against the Ottoman Empire, and more recently, a year before the Ladlo massacre, fighting in the Balkan Wars, and hundreds of thousands of immigrants moved to Greece to fight in the Balkan Wars. It's very interesting that the Greeks were very proud of their military might, and they will be showing off their military skills to state militia. And it's very interesting that this experience with guerrilla fighting, of course, was very successful here, effective in this kind of landscape where they would just shoot the strike breakers. The strike breakers were extremely important for breaking strikes, and the Union was absolutely determined in order to get the strike successful. They were very much targeting strike breakers. The militancy of the Greeks, right? So again, many of us will recognize the issue that your honor is insulted on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for a month, and you had it, and you needed some recourse, and you had no power to answer back, and then you would resort to violence in order to take revenge. But then we have a shift of the Greeks started joining unions. The militancy of the Greeks posed a problem for the union, bad publicity. It fed the idea that the union is undisciplined, un-American, they are killing people, they are not a modern American institution, they don't play the game fair. It was necessary that strikers exercised restraint and followed union tactics of negotiation. In other words, effective union membership required a fundamental shift in the behavior. The traditional code of honor requiring vengeance had to be set aside in favor of organized resistance. It is in this juncture where Louis Stikas enters history as a labor organizer. He was hired to translate and mediate between the culture of the Greek strikers and union expectations. This is a painting by Colorado Springs, Lindsay is her first name, and we will see she refers to a photograph by Tikas. Tikas is wearing a star, and this indicates his status as a kind of a sheriff in the 10th colony, where he was making sure that everything was in order, and he will mediate disputes, and he will negotiate also with the representatives of the state militia. So we see then for the first time, gradually the Greek, I say for the first time because the Greek immigrants had no experience of unionization, industrial warfare, class warfare, because they were coming from an agricultural settings and they didn't have prior experience of these kinds of labor relations. But we see a shift, and they turn to union because they realize that this is one route for them to start fighting for their rights. I should mention that the coal miners involved in trade unionism, there was not a radical dimension in trade unionism, unlike, let's say, the international workers of the world, which in many ways advocated a revolution and the demolition of capitalism. But here then we have certain occupations organizing their members in order to advance, protect and advance their own interests. As an aside, there were Greeks who in the late 1910s, early 1920s joined the Communist American Party. If you're interested, there is a documentary available online. There is a book by the same author. And again, here we see, this is the international workers of the world I mentioned. In many ways, there was literature then to try to instill in Greeks class consciousness, to try to make them see that they're participating in a system where the coal operators were using their labor in order for them to profit, but in many ways exploit, in these particular cases, the workers. The word that the author Kostis Karpozoulos uses, taxisynthesia, which is class consciousness now. Tikas emerged as a labor organizer in the context of the strike in the southern coal fields of Colorado, one of the largest strikes organized by the United Mine Workers of America. It lasted more than a year. It was from September to April. It was a brutal winter. And then it led to the Ludlow massacre, as I mentioned. It was an clear instance of class war between the strikers, an assortment of company militia, private detectives hired by the companies, and state militia, all of these units representing the interests of the coal operators. It has not been determined who fired the first shot. There's some undocumented, there are some rumors that it was one Greek. The strikers were armed, they had weapons, because they were expecting an attack by the state militia. The relations with the state militia and the mine guards was tense, poisonous. There were memories. The militia had, in many ways, positioned themselves as the culmination of the anxiety and the stress was increasing. They positioned their machine guns towards the tent colony. The miners had fresh memories of the militia demolishing another camp 4 miles away, the Forbes camp. So there was anticipation of conflict. So here we have, just in a nutshell, we have a situation where resentment and anger accumulates among the strikers. They strike, and the armed forces whose goal is to end the strike is very interesting. The coal operators refused to negotiate really for 9 months. They wanted the strike over, hence the destruction. As I mentioned, 25 people died, 11 children and 2 women and 3 militiamen. The way the children and the women died, they suffocated. They had dug cellars beneath their tents in order to store some goods, but also hide in case the shooting started. And they tried to avoid the fires by hiding. What happened is, once the strikers fled with their arms, the militia entered the camp and it put it on fire, resulting to suffocating these individuals. Among the dead were 3 labor organizers killed while negotiating a truce. Tikas was murdered on the back, he was shot on the back. His funeral, a 1-mile procession, was attended by stunned and enraged coal miners who traveled from Utah, New Mexico, and elsewhere to pay their respects. About 500 Greek coal miners attended this solemn procession. There is here a poem I just wanted to show from John Manessis.
Those written in Greek, those poems?
No, in English. There are songs in Greek, I will mention, yeah. What followed was raw violence against mine properties. And here we see again, now we see again the notion of vengeance. Before the funeral, 4 Greeks carrying their muskets entered the chapel. They lifted their hats, muttered an oath to avenge Louis's death. The Union calls the miners to arms. That's an official letter from the United Mine Workers of America. I'm just sharing the opening paragraph. Organize the men in your community in companies of volunteers to protect the workers of Colorado against the murder and cremation of men, women, and children by armed assassins in the employ of coal corporations serving under the guise of state militiamen. Gather together for defensive purposes all arms and ammunition legally available. About 1,000, even more angry strikers got into a rampage of killing and destruction. It is called as a civil insurrection. It was ugly. It's very interesting that the newspapers again will cite the Greeks and their skills in the guerrilla warfare. The strikers targeted mine property. They also put fire on a number of mines and also killed indiscriminately mine. To engage with federal troops. What they wanted was a revenge against those who were exploiting them. So the many hikers, many miners went then in hiding. I strongly recommend again mainstream, right? Again, this is not leftist propaganda. This is mainstream American historiography. PBS documentary about Ludlow is very open access. You may wish to watch it for more details. The United Mine Workers of America was very quick to commemorate the dead in 1918. We have the Ludlow Massacre Memorial. The name of Louis Stikas is cited first. Louis Stikas became a martyr and a symbol of injustice against labor. His name was imprinted in history as early as 1918. As early as 1914, there is a song entitled Ludlow Martyr, dedicated to Stikas. Oh, Louis Stikas, gallant soul, defender of the helpless, weak, knight of humanity, you were more than American or Greek. Stikas' heroism appears in yet another song written by Frank Manning in 2002. I just offer some verses here. Guns and Lives were cheap in Colorado is available on YouTube. And coal was king in 1910, and in the deepest coal mine's darkest shadow, there was no justice for the working man. The National Guard arrived with their machine guns, and they cracked a rifle over Louis's head, and they shot him till he died, but they still weren't satisfied till they filled his lifeless body up with lead. So again, augmenting, right, the sense of injustice, like many songs are meant to do. Mourn with me, my sisters and my brothers, for a leader lying silent in the grave, a man who lived his whole life saving others, and in the end his life is what he gave. Louis lived his whole life saving others, and in the end his life is what he gave. So the Union then and the Union culture mythologized Stikas. But who was Stikas? Where was he born? His name was most probably Americanized. A report in the Greek language newspaper Atlantis in the immediate aftermath of his killing mentioned, and I have lost my slide here, my apologies, but I will show it to you later. So an article in Atlantis published immediately after the disaster the destruction, mentioned his names, but then he disappears from the immigrant press. The immigrant press is not venturing into this issue that was in many ways controversial for the Greek immigrant and the Greek American community. It was an aspiring novelist, Zisi Papanikolaou, the son of Helen Papanikolaou, who in the early 1970s ventured to reconstruct Tikas's life. He came across the name Louis the Greek for the first time in a pamphlet in the library basement while researching a novel, and he was intrigued. He had heard stories from his mother, and when he mentioned this to his mother, she would say that yes, the old-timers, the pioneers had heard about Tikas, and his name was circulating. The name Tikas was everywhere, it seems, but the real Tikas was a shadow in history, a kind of a ghost. Nobody knew much about him other than his memorialization and his heroization. Papanikolaou embarked on a quest for historical reconstruction, a daunting task given the meager archive. It required the aspiring novelist to reinvent himself as an oral historian, a researcher of the immigrant history, and historian of the American labor movement. And a product of painstaking research, the book turned an elusive figure into a biography. It was a partial and fragmentary reconstruction, to be sure, yet nevertheless a recovery from the dark hollow of his absence from history. Papanikolaou devoted 7 years to researching Tikas. He interviewed a couple of Greek old-timers about their experience in the 1910s as coal miners. He researched the archives of the United Mine Workers of America and library archives. He was thrilled to find out that the photographer who documented the strike was still alive. The early phase of the research generated valuable fragments. It brought focus to Tikas's declaration of intention for citizenship in 1910, only 4 years after his arrival in the United States. He arrived in the United States in 1906. The application listed his occupation in Denver. He co-owned a coffee house at the time. Union records show that in 1912, he became a coal miner in the northern fields of Colorado. We don't know about this movement from his coffee house to becoming a coal miner. Rumors have it that he was initially a scab. This is unverified. We know that he was assigned the role of the labor leader organizing the strike in 1913. Papanikolaou brought to the center of public attention the few available archival photographs featuring his figure. To connect with his role in the strike, this is one is of his funeral procession, we saw it, one lying dead near the strikers' colony. I chose not to show you this photograph. And the other one, the most graphic one, his body in the morgue. Papanikolaou also located the site of Tikas's burial, and he was instrumental in restoring it. Between these facts, there was a great deal of contradictions. Some information was obviously false. The more Papanikolaou was trying to understand Tikas, the more Tikas was slipping away from any effort to provide a definitive account of his life. What emerged from this phase of research was the American Tikas. But what were his Tikas's pre-American beginnings? Tikas was an elusive shadow in the archive. A piece of information in the Declaration of Intent for Citizenship was a key for the search. Tikas reported that he was born in a village east of the town of Rethymnon, 8 miles west of town. So what Zisi Papanikolaou did, he wrote letters to every president of a community within a radius of about 10 miles from Rethymnon. The much desired letter arrived from the village of Lutra, connecting Papanikolaou with Tikas's nephew, who is still alive. He wrote a book about it. He's very active in, of course, preserving the memory of Louis. As a result, and the uncle has restored the family home of Ticas. He tries to make it a museum. So now we have a name for Ticas. His name is Elias Anastasios Spandidakis. Some family information emerged too. Ticas' father was the owner of a coffee house. Ticas had a brother who was killed by the Nazis. His sister's engagement was planned for the same day that Ticas was killed. And now we have a photo of Ticas taken days before his departure for the United States. He poses in full traditional regalia, displaying his local identity, his Cretan identity. It is of interest to juxtapose the two photographs, the American or Greek-American Ticas on the one hand, and Ticas the Cretan.
Cut his mustache off.
Yes, he did. Thank you. Yes. And if we see also photographs of Achepa in 1922, about 90% of Achepans also had shaved their mustaches. That was the requirement for presenting themselves as Americans. So the facial hair was gone.
Here in Chicago, we have a saying, "Go jump in the lake."
Right. The contrast between the two photographs is dazzling. The semiotics conveys a major identity shift of within only a span of 7 years. His mustache, a symbol of Cretan masculinity, that was serious stuff to have a mustache back then. That meant to be a man is to have a mustache. The mustache is gone, sacrificed, along with his real name, to the demands of Americanization. The migrant journey marked a vast cultural transition. A person who grew up in rural Greece, Crete, migrates and soon places himself in the midst of class war in industrial America. From a son of a farmer and a coffee house owner, he finds himself at the center of America's class war and a labor organizer. It is a profound transformation. Ticas was not unique in joining the union as a leader. There were many Ticases, many Greeks, who participated in the labor movement. As I mentioned, they mostly joined trade unionism. The importance, though, of knowing about Louis Ticas lies in that now we have an understanding, albeit partial, of how a coal miner from Crete negotiated two worlds, the Cretan and the American. On the one hand, the Cretan ethos dictated vengeance when honor was insulted, violent insurrection for freedom. Their memories against the Ottoman Empire, violent insurrection against oppression. On the other hand, the union ethos prescribed organized action and negotiation. Though not a stranger to violence, the union dictated discipline, following orders, restraint, refraining from random acts of violence. So we do witness the formation of a Greek-American person who understands the new American reality, participates in American institutions. He acts as an American with his Americanized name and his mustache gone. But at the same time, he holds on to aspects of his Cretan identity. He died both as a Greek, and I will explain why, as a Greek, he died as a Greek, and as an American union organizer. The lieutenant who hit him fiercely on the face and ordered his killing was known for his racist views and personal antipathy towards the Greeks, who would consider savages and primitives. And he was known also for his personal antipathy toward Tikas. In his eyes, Tikas as an immigrant was lower than him, yet he dared to challenge his authority. For this alone, from the perspective of a lieutenant, he deserved punishment. It was a racist killing, in addition to class, labor-related killing. The book was generative. It created all kinds of narratives about Tikas. The Greek Americans have recognized Tikas. The foundation of Hellenism in America in 1918, it erected a statue of him in Trinidad. A Greek American high school from Brooklyn did a pilgrimage. And they also paraded in the 25th March Independence Parade in Brooklyn, wearing their t-shirts in honor of Tikas. Tikas has been sanctified. This is work by a Greece-based Orthodox, where Tikas is seen as entering paradise and joining some visionaries like Martin Luther King. You see, joining and Mother Jones. Somehow entering, right, the sacred place of paradise, and the same painter here in many ways sanctifies the immigrants. Somehow he places them in relation to Greek Orthodox.
What's his name?
I don't recall it. Yeah, I don't recall it. But I will.
There was one, but I can't recall his name either. That used the same colors and.
Yeah, I would definitely, but I have it on my note. Yeah. Metropolitan Isaiah of Colorado. This is the 2014 centenary commemoration at the Ludlow massacre site. He is the son of one of the people who participated in Ludlow. It's very interesting, and we visited 2 years ago with a colleague, and we met Metropolitan Isaiah. He has created a mural in the inside of the church, and he has he insisted, and his will was his wish was respected, to include a scene from the Ludlow massacre. So in many ways, this becomes also, and this is an interesting story. I don't have time to go over it, but he becomes also a narrative of the Greek Orthodoxy in America, kind of an American Greek Orthodoxy, that now Greek Orthodoxy has Greek Orthodox martyrs in the United States. A number of books by David Mason, an incredible narrative poem. I strongly recommend it. I mentioned Lindsay Hall, the painter, and also the Mexican Americans have written a corrido, a traditional Mexican song about Tikas. Now Mexican Americans, of course, find a great deal of inspiration from the labor struggles of the past, because they are also now engaged in all kinds of labor issues. Here I would like to share with you something that puzzles me. This is a copy from the article published in Atlantis I mentioned earlier, reporting to the Greek immigrants about what happened in Ludlow. Κεφάλαιον και εργασία, capital and labor is the title. So it's very interesting. So Tikas was murdered, and then another Greek, Petros Katsoulis, was declared the leader of the Greeks. But what we see for the last 20 years, for the 20 years now, everybody, all Greek American platforms write about Tikas. But what we see that many publications, including this one published in the Greek Reporter, somehow they identify Katsoulis as Tikas. Tikas historically was an elusive figure, and now there's another here element that somehow there is a misremembering and a misrepresentation of his identity. I fear something else, though, and I would like to share this fear with you, that somehow the statue of this person who's supposed to be Tikas, is he after Katsoulis or is it after Tikas? Hard to tell. How much time do I have?
It's 4:37, I think. I think we have it till at least 5, maybe a little longer.
5 minutes. Okay,
Oh, 5, you have about 20 minutes
20 minutes left.
or 15 minutes and then we could.
15 minutes. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I would like to share with you some reflections. Colorado honors coal miners as being major contributors to the economy of the nation and their sacrifices. Again, regional emphasis, American institutions recognizing the coal miners. In conclusion, I would like to share with you a reflection, again, to raise a question: how does this matter for us to know this past that we saw? Knowing about this past certainly contributes to historical memory, our self-understanding, our aptognosia. If we claim a Greek American identity, I would think that we will be curious of how Greek immigrants, Greek Americans, have negotiated their place in different eras, historical periods, and in particular occupations in the United States. Right? That's part of our history. So although the coal miners are honored by American institutions, in many ways, I believe that Greek American institutions are reticent to really probe deeply into this issue. And what I will say is, out of a genuine interest and a genuine commitment, I believe that we must create communities like this one, but also in our media, so that we will have genuine, open conversations about the past, even if this past might be controversial for some of us. Some Greek American institutions do acknowledge this past, but only to cite the early struggles, and there were many. Immigrants broke their backs. Perhaps you know it better than I do. Your parents, your grandparents. But the institutions refer to this past only to cite it as evidence of Greek resilience and early experience which eventually led to socioeconomic success. Other institutions opt for silence. Why is this the case? I believe the reticence to fully recognize the experience of Greek industrial workers is because it undermines prevailing self-perceptions of the group. The prevailing narrative of Greek America is celebratory. It extols entrepreneurial acumen and links hard work with success. It posits essential Greek values, such as the philotimo, there's a whole narrative about it, as an additional cause of mobility and a source of superior morality. The narrative presents us as a model American ethnic group which overcame adversity and earned success on its own bootstraps. But the historical record undermines the ideology of the model ethnic group. A significant percentage of Greek coal miners were illegal. Economic success for some was due to network of Greek padrones and their agents exploiting fellow Greeks. The exploitation was not restricted to coal miners and railroad laborers. It extended to the shoe shine businesses involving illegal child labor. Helen Papanikolas does not mince her words when it comes to exploitation as an early source of immigrant wealth for some, I underline for some. She has spoken this truth in public, I quote, "Men who had combined a business with supplying labor for scleries as a sideline were the earliest of Utah's successful Greeks. Their days as labor agents dimmed, and the origin of the money that bought their business and property was almost forgotten." And at the time she wrote this, she lived her entire life in Salt Lake City. So she criticizes then parts of Greek businessmen in the past for making wealth out of the sweat of others. So clearly also we cannot think of the Greek American history as a linear history of struggle and success. Many immigrants struggled, but they did not succeed, and that was not their fault. Also, we cannot embrace without skepticism national mythologies about equal opportunity and fairness in the country. In fact, a close look at how American society treated immigrants will reveal that they were two radically different Americas when it came to the perception of immigrants. Coal miners were humiliated by the nativists and exploited by companies. But outside the coal mines, the progressive movement in the United States, which was alarmed by the spread of slums and poverty, castigated the exploitation of labor. It embraced immigrants, contributing to their gradual acculturation. And here in Chicago, there is this example of an alternative Americanism where the reformists in many ways embraced immigrants. They understood, of course, the value of acculturation, but they understood also this is a gradual process that you need in many ways to embrace immigrants, teach them, help them orient, and treat them as human beings. In the 1920s, when the Castlegate mine exploded, there were two versions of Americanism and two Greek immigrant paths to assimilation. If there were two Americas, there were two Greek Americas as well, as I will explain. At the time, the Ku Klux Klan was controlling Congress, demanding pure and undefiled Americanism, I quote in their words, as a condition for accepting immigrants. A sector of the Greek American emerging class of small businessmen capitulated to this rhetoric as the means for securing protection and earning respect. They were hailed as exceptional Americans by the media and city authorities. But there was an alternative Americanism. Some in the immigrant labor class embraced Greek laborers who joined trade unionism, who made basic demands: respect in the workplace, higher wages, and the right to negotiate with the mine companies issues regarding wages and safety measures. The safety measures is another tragic story that I will not be touching today. But those immigrants who joined the union were seen as un-American by the Ku Klux Klan, who in many ways represented the interests of the coal operators. So we have then two Americas, and we have two divergent paths of acculturation, assimilation of Greek immigrants. One, middle class, embracing the rhetoric of pure and undefiled Americanism, the other one demanding more rights as laborers. In the domain, again, speaking about two Americas, and perhaps also we will think about it today also we speak about, we live in at least two Americas, right? In the domain of politics, laws prohibited contractual labor, but the implementation of those laws was relaxed. Some Colorado politicians, as well as high-up members of the military, were sympathetic to immigrants. Unions, though often discriminating against the immigrants, they needed and supported them. But the militia and mine guards were racist, openly, and often members of the Klan. Media often echoed the Klan accusation that the joining of unions made the immigrants un-American. On the issue of mine safety, state inspectors and scientists were pleading, and we have plenty of evidence, were pleading with operators to implement stricter safety measures. The technology was there. But the majority of mine owners ignored the recommendations. The results, as we have seen, were disasters. All this demonstrates that there was, again, not a single America at the time, but at least two different ones. One trying to stay true to its ideals, one undermining them. There were also at least two Greek Americans at war pursuing two divergent paths to Americanization. In this context, our focus on the coal mining experience invites us to rethink how we tell Greek American history. We cannot any longer be telling a linear story. This is because there is no such a thing as a single America at any one historical period. In turn, immigrant and ethnic assimilation is a multi-directional process, not a uniform one. Let us remember the civil rights movement, when the American people held dramatically contrasting views in the movement, in the civil rights movement. Similarly, a sector of Greek America embraced the stance of Archbishop Yorgos on civil rights, his marching with Martin Luther King, while another sector, mostly in the South, was critical, siding with the segregationists. And in this interview on YouTube, Yorgos is very clear about it. He says, they called me a traitor, prodoti, for marching in Selma. They called me an un-American. They called me an non-Christian. His fellow Christians, right? So again, we have divisions that we need to understand if we want to approach our past historically. So in conclusion, I believe that we need to recognize our diversity, both in the past and in the present. Oftentimes, the narratives we tell about Greek America portray a kind of a uniform group, and this is in many ways an artifice. We are complex, and we are in many ways diversifying in ways we do not understand. So I advocate then thinking about the past historically, and this historical approach in many ways invites institutions, communities, organizations, individuals to move away from all-encompassing narratives of struggle and success and embrace a historiography which is finely tuned to how Greek Americans and ethnic institutions negotiated their identity in specific situations, under specific circumstances, and move beyond self-congratulatory myths. We are 150 years since immigration. We must feel confident to really engage in a self-reflection about all aspects of our experience, and also look at specific human dramas of the grandparents, the parents, us, who negotiate our place with the Greek world and the American world in different ways, so that we will be learning from each other. So we must, I believe, move away then from this kind of grand narratives that tell the Greek American story in general terms, abstract terms, general terms and in a linear fashion, and try to look at specifics, try to understand ourselves. I believe that this is a historical approach to remembering, so to practice historical remembering. And I think this is what we, Greek Americans, should be doing as learned Greek American citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anagnostou, for a very enlightening lecture. We have some time to field some questions. Does anybody wanna? Yes, would you like to?
I wonder if there was a study ever made of a comparison of the economic development of that segment of people that came to America vis-a-vis the same type of group, if there is a comparison group to group, and how they lived in Greece. For example, these guys came in that died in the mines, or they suffered in the mines. They came from an economic area, probably the mountains of Sparta or somewhere. And a similar group in Greece, did they suffer economically equally?
Right. There is no comparison. That's the short answer. Certainly, the Greek experience, that's a very interesting question. We can start somehow exploring this terrain. Is that the Peloponnese, since you mentioned Sparta, the Peloponnese experienced a tremendous level of development, and the quality of living for many families was significantly improved because of immigrant remittances. Immigrants saving money and sending money to not only to their families, they could renovate their homes, buy furniture, but also they were investing in community philanthropy, churches, and also the construction of roads. We know there is a book exploring the impact of immigrant money on the Peloponnese.
But this group vis-a-vis group, not in
You mean the coal miners?
the coal miners. I mean,
Right.
the coal miners came to this
Yeah,
country to
yes.
suffer indignities.
Right.
Should they have lived in Greece and not been, and with a similar group in Greece?
Okay, there is no study. The prospects for rural Greeks at the time were dire. They were not great. There was heavy levels of taxation. There were no job opportunities. The mortgage rates were incredibly high. So they would be dealing with economic hardships, but most likely the danger that they would have faced, the deadly danger, would be in the two Balkan wars, 1912 and 1913.
Okay.
And then there will be the war, the Asia Minor campaign, where many young men died. That's a great question, but again, it's a huge gap in the literature.
So, yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. Right,
Yeah,
right.
go ahead.
Just a
Yes,
point,
yes,
there
go
is
ahead.
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I don't know if there is any study or information